Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you to our first Thought Leaders series for 2022, Engineering the Olympics, Is It Gold for Manufacturing? My name is Amanda and I'll be your host for today. Firstly, in keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge support of our sponsors for the Engineering the Olympics series: Arup, Oricon, Carnot, GHD and SMEC. Today we will hear from two speakers, followed by a live audience Q&A session, and I encourage you to send questions through to our speakers via the YouTube chat box during today's presentations. I'd now like to welcome our first speaker for today, David Tutor. David joined Innovative Manufacturing CRC as CEO in June 2016. David is passionate about the local industry and creating a stronger platform for Australian manufacturing through catalysing investment in innovation, collaboration and competitiveness. Before joining IMCRC, David was CEO of MHG Asia Pacific from 2014 and was a member of Futurist Automotive's executive leadership team from 2001. David holds a first-class honours degree in manufacturing engineering and management from the University of Bath in the UK and is a chartered engineer with the Institution of Engineering and Technology. David also is a director of the CRC Association. Please welcome David Shooter.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you for the opportunity and privilege to talk to everyone today. This is a once-in-a-generation event for many of us, so really it is about seizing the opportunity. Look, today I'd just like, first of all, to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which many of us are coming from around the country, and to acknowledge and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Amanda's given a very kind introduction to me. I've spent 30 years odd in manufacturing, and the last few years I've touched literally hundreds of businesses and research organizations in the space I've been in who have been driving innovation, new business models, new ideas, and transforming manufacturing. And so when I think of the Olympics, I think of opportunity and not risk. Shay will talk to you later on about, how we go about participating and what's the role of government, and what are some of the things to think about. But for me, we've got 10 years to get ready for this. 5 years probably, because businesses need to have ideas out in the market. But the opportunity is to really position Australia as a global leader in high technology, advanced design and manufacturing. I think this is a great opportunity for us, and one that we can attract countless numbers of new engineers and designers and manufacturers into the industry and really use it to drive our industry forwards. So today I want to really just talk to you about my thoughts on what manufacturing now is in Australia, some of the priorities that we have here and how they might dovetail in. But I'd also like to take an opportunity to go back on a journey to see how previous Olympics and previous nations have applied innovation that in turn has led to transformative outcomes for their industry and for businesses and for people within those sectors. I thought it might be worthwhile just recapping on prior presentations. 2032 seems like a long time away, but trust me, every year seems to be going faster than the year before. And that just seems to be the nature of things with exponential rate of change in technologies and other disruptions around the world. When I looked at the website for Brisbane 2032, it's all about talking about accelerating long-term statewide and regional priorities. Well, of course, I'd like to add an Australian flavour to that. This is about opportunities for all of Australia. It's not just about Queensland, although Queensland and Brisbane will obviously be the champions and drivers of that. But we can bring new ideas and innovation and great things to the world from Australia through this Olympics opportunity. The website does note it's about creating an ongoing legacy, and I think that's something we all need to be cautious of, that this is not just a one-off opportunity. It's about providing a national platform to amplify everything that we're proud and good of, and things that the rest of the world looks to Australia for leadership, and we rightly deliver. So I want to talk specifically about manufacturing and the opportunities. As I said, I've been in manufacturing for more decades than I can probably count. Uh, but one of the things I have seen is the ups and downs within Australian manufacturing as to whether it actually matters or not. I spent much of my career working in the global automotive industry, and it myself was one of the victims of the end of car production here in Australia. But that hasn't meant that we've lost the ability to design and engineer around automotive industries and use those technologies to drive other sectors in food and agribusiness, in defense, in space, and across a number of other areas. So it's been really interesting that COVID has seen a new light shed on manufacturing here in Australia. We've seen empty supermarket shelves, we've seen supply chain disruption, and all of a sudden we now have what I think is very clear bipartisan support at a political level that manufacturing really does matter again for Australia. And what you're now seeing, and there's plenty of stuff to read if you want to do some homework in your own time, we're now seeing a modern manufacturing strategy that the coalition has outlined for Australia that invests in over 4 years around a range of national manufacturing priorities. And I'll talk about that shortly. We've seen only in the last week a new university research commercialization action plan being launched, $2.2 billion worth of investment over 10 years to encourage industry and research communities and universities to play a role as trailblazers, again, around building manufacturing innovation and capability. The Queensland government has one of the most mature and comprehensive 10-year action plans for manufacturing in the state. And I think it's a real opportunity to see how Queensland can lead ahead of other states that are also trying to compete to be the home of manufacturing, notably New South Wales and Victoria. And we have an excellent publication from the CSIRO, an advanced manufacturing technologies description, right down to the SME business level. It's a great read for anyone looking to get on the journey of innovation and digital manufacturing. So there's lots we're doing quite well in Australia, but we tend to operate largely at subscale where manufacturing hasn't been a large part of our GDP. And it's also been hard to try and attract the youth in Australia to come and work in manufacturing. And I'll touch on more on that in a little bit. So, what we do have now, however, is a very clear articulation of 6 national manufacturing priorities. These are the sectors that have been determined where we have comparative and competitive advantage globally, and where we can build that competitive and comparative advantage around exports and really positioning ourselves. They're industries that have been described as important to the country, and they also align quite well with state priorities as you travel around the country. Resources technology, critical minerals processing, food and beverage, medical products manufacturing, and health and pharmaceutical, recycling and clean energy, defence and space. And there's probably not one of those that Queensland itself isn't seeing as a key target area. And there's also not one of those that isn't going to have opportunities with respect to the Olympics. When you do think about the Olympics Games, your obvious reaction, as mine was, it was all the buildings and stadiums and villages and infrastructure. But notably, building and construction actually is not listed as one of the national manufacturing priority sectors, but it is going to be a big opportunity. That said, I know that Queensland and Brisbane in particular are very flush with existing resources through other sporting stadiums and other global events that have been run in the state and in the city. So I don't think this Games is going to create quite the same opportunity as prior Games may have done for construction of new facilities, but there's no doubt there will be a big opportunity in the building construction sector. But a message I'd like to really get with you is that manufacturing is far more than just production. When we think of manufacturing, it's easy to think of factory environments. And you can see the picture there, dark, dingy environments. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth of what modern and advanced manufacturing is all about. And so what I really want to do is want to talk to you about the world that describes or sees manufacturing as an enabling broad capability that lifts the industrial capacity of any nation and supports nearly all industry sectors. And while we're very passionate about making more here in Australia, we need just to be cautious that of a country of 25 odd million, and even with export opportunities, we're not going to be making everything here. So what we should be focusing on the things that we can be very good at and the things we can be globally competitive. But I like to see manufacturing as a journey that encompasses everything from research and development, design and engineering, all the way through building the logistics, the supply chains, the suppliers and customers that are going to be needed. Of course, the whole world of digital manufacturing and Industry 4 is one that needs to be applied in the production and factory environment. But production itself is already being distributed, with people being able to 3D print things at home and offices. That's a form of manufacturing. And then there's the opportunity beyond production to look at distribution, sales, marketing, the creation of services and platforms, and even what do you do at the end of life. And so when I look at the opportunities in manufacturing, notably, we do think about production and quality control. But when you think about the opportunities to create new business models, the opportunity to attract talent and youth and students and engineers into manufacturing, I think far more broadly, it's very difficult for me to talk to my 11 and 13-year-old children about following their father into manufacturing when I describe factories. But when I talk to them about things like 3D printing and robotics and virtual reality and computing and apps and so on, they get really quite excited. And that's the way we need to change the paradigm of manufacturing. But the reality is, the services that can be enabled by production beyond the factory floor are likely to be the ones where we can export to the world as services and solutions and platforms, where logistics of physically shipping products aren't constraining. So there is an argument, an economic argument, that says those companies that play on either side of the production game, that invest heavily in design and engineering, and all the way through to monitoring their products through a digital app and even managing their products at the end of the life, the value and revenue streams they can create and the lock-in strategy with their customers and consumers will be far greater than someone simply competing on a production basis. And that's a really important message when you think about the Olympics. And it's an even more important one, I think, in terms of attracting engineers and designers into the manufacturing industry to support so many of our important sectors. When it comes to manufacturing and why we need to invest in Australia more, we're doing that at a time when digital technologies are transforming manufacturing and supply chains all over the world. You've probably heard of something called Industry 4.0, but really that's largely informed by a range of emerging technology trends that are affecting all industry and service sectors. Things like the Internet of Things, IoT, robotics, not just in physical robots, but robots and bots and apps that digitalize what we do in the workplace. Um, Artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, and the ever increasing power, computing power, and the investment that goes into these four technology areas is just increasing every year. Now, this is not just about manufacturing, this is how it's changing our lives. But when it comes to a business opportunity and the opportunity for engineering, it's what it can do. What's the value proposition? Improved efficiencies, getting to market faster, be it lower costs, new business models and value that you can take to customers and consumers. Where that then translates in turn into the manufacturing environment is taking this concept of digital technologies and describing something which is called Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution. There's nothing sinister about the phrase Industry 4. It's simply a description that's been applied to a collection of technologies such as Internet of Things, 3D printing, autonomous robots, virtual reality, all the way through to digital twins, cybersecurity, big data and analytics. It's just a collection of technologies that any business, small or large, can apply to drive efficiencies and change their business models. What it is doing, however, it's changing the way people think about using technologies. And what we're now seeing is this is driving digital business models, circular economy outcomes, outcome economy models where you maybe are getting paid based on the results of what you do, as opposed to necessarily what you produce. It's driving the growth in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other technologies such as blockchain. And what this is then doing is really changing the world of manufacturing to one that I now call intelligent manufacturing, where it's data driven, it's live data, and it's really live interactivity between design and engineering and what consumers are using out in the marketplace. And that's ultimately going to change the way we all work. And therefore, Industry 4.0, it's not a long connection to say it is about the future of work and how we are going to interact with these digital tools and robotics. The fact we're all doing this through virtual screens now is such a change from 2 years ago when we would have all come together in physical events. And then when you look at opportunities specifically for Australian manufacturing, where I think we should be investing in skills and research innovation, and if I were a business, I'd be looking quickly at these opportunities in my business. I'd be looking at how you can apply sensors and data analytics to get real-time data, not just in terms of your design and your factory and your supply chain, But whatever you make, could that be digitally connected? And you could be gathering data from consumers out in the field, wherever they're using your products or services, anywhere in the world. The opportunities for advanced materials. I'll show you some examples of how that has changed the Olympic Games in certain sports. Smart robotics and automation, 3D printing and additive manufacturing, which is an opportunity unique to Australia, where if you can print something locally, you have no need for imported and long supply chains and disruption. And you can print something that is exactly what a consumer or customer wants. And then overlay that with the digital augmented and virtual reality world, I see that's a technology that's about to go vertical in terms of its uptake and accelerated use. And so we're already seeing this. We're seeing 3D printing of bespoke devices, if you like, or implants coming into the medical space. Is it manufacturing? Well, it's not in a factory anymore, but it's using all the same skills of R&D and design and regulatory approval and manufacturing. It just may be taking place in a hospital theatre that completely transforms patient and health outcomes. We're investing in a project in our CRC with a surgeon who wants to take kangaroo tendons and use them for human replacement of ACL joints. So think of a sports person who damages their knee. Well, there may be a very local customizable solution to use kangaroo tendons that is completely geographically defensible because no other country has kangaroos around the world. So it's an instant export opportunity. These are the types of innovations that are going to drive our industry forward. We're seeing innovation in food and agriculture. A company in Queensland called Swarm Farm is probably going to lead the world and create an export model in very lightweight, very smart robotic facilities. Is it manufacturing? Well, it's robotics in the food environment. It's the two industries coming together. And if you don't believe that's happening quickly, look at another company called Vertical Farms. This is probably the future of farming, where you can exactly control the quality and the process for manufacturing and not being exposed to global environmental changes. We're also seeing in food, there are things you can now make in food using 3D printing and other technologies that you can't make any other way. What opportunities does that create? And then when you look at the mining sector, we lead the world in autonomous vehicles. We may well be the first nation to have human-free underground mining. Think of the opportunities for that when it comes to global mobility and, mobility of humans. Think of a 2032 Olympics, and what does that mean in terms of how we might travel around to get to and from the Olympics? And then you look at things like 3D printing in the building sector. Why would the construction of facilities for Brisbane, for the Olympics, be manufactured in a traditional way? Perhaps you could be using 3D printing, as I'm showing you some pictures here, a much more sustainable, localized, customized solution with far less waste and a much more environmentally improved and probably a lower cost outcome. These are the opportunities that are presenting themselves, but there are also others around the world fast tracking innovation in this space. We're seeing one over in Perth, Fastbrick, the first robotic manufacturer of houses and buildings, a bricklayer. It's taking over a task that is probably pretty much a dull and boring and repetitive task, but is now allowing the people in the bricklaying industry to learn about robotics and programming such that they can do things that they couldn't do, and the machine could do, working with humans, things that the machine couldn't do on its own. And therein lies the opportunity, bringing technology and humans together. I just want to touch on some examples that we've invested in at our CRC. We've been operational for about 5 years. We've got 70 to 75 projects that we're up and running with industry partners who all work with Australian universities in the CSIRO. That's led to a portfolio of about $230 million. And we've also touched hundreds, probably as many as 1,000 manufacturers and 600 SMEs on helping to educate and raise their awareness about industrial transformation opportunities and how they can change their business model. This is not a promotion for IMCRC, but what I want to touch on is that if you're not thinking about game-changing technologies in your business or your area, others already are in Australia. And here are some examples that could well be applicable to a Brisbane 2032 opportunity. A local company, UAP, out at Northgate near the airport, is probably one of the world's leaders in design and manufacturing of bespoke artwork and installations. Great opportunity for the Olympics. They are one of the first in Australia to teach robots to see for themselves. We've got another Brisbane company called Verton, who is changing the world in terms of how things can be lifted safely in big industrial and shipyard environments using smart robotics, gyro sensing systems, augmented reality, sensors, all in a package that just completely transforms the way that shipyards and manufacturing can work. We've got another company, Monitum, who's making sensors for large-scale industrial and building construction environments. And then when you look more broadly, we're working on a project with Boral that is about substantially reducing the CO2 emissions that come from the production of concrete. It could well be a world first exportable, but opportunity for SMEs to use that for construction. We've got other companies like Formflow who have found a very novel way to take the traditional color bond material and bend it through 90 degrees to create shapes for buildings that you could never have imagined previously. A Tasmanian company that's cornering the world in using very smart materials and 3D printing solutions for lightning protection devices that sit on buildings. A couple more. We've got Rux Energy looking at green energy storage solutions. There's no doubt every Olympics from now on is going to be about sustainability and reuse. We've got Energy Renaissance building factories for local manufacturing of battery solutions. And then we have companies like Speed 3D who are building Speed 3D and 3D printing machines that are the size of a small office that you can move anywhere. So the ability to locally produce and maintain and sustain and reuse. We have a great armada of Australian companies already investing in this space. The question is, what are you doing in your business to get on this innovation journey, and what help can you get? A message I do put to most companies when I talk to them, however, it's about not so much what technology can do for you. And so if there's a second theme I want you to take away, it's around that manufacturing leadership and business model innovation are really the why or the how that you need to consider before you dive into the application of technology. And Brisbane Olympics opportunities are going to be about the business model and the partnerships that you form. It won't necessarily be about the technology you create, but it may be about the technology that you apply. So when I think about seizing the Olympic opportunity, I looked back over many Olympics to see what they have done as to whether there's something here that might inspire your imagination or interest or stimulate you into thinking about what might we need for our Olympics. Shay will be talking about the opportunities and whether we actually have a clear strategy or vision for our Olympics in terms of what we really want to showcase. Now, that's not entirely government's responsibility. We'll be looking for industry and research and innovation leadership, but there's no doubt the opportunity is there when you look back at what other Olympics have done in the past. So when I look back at, we've just had the Tokyo Olympics, and I'd just like to go all the way back to Tokyo when they had the Olympics in 1964. It was the first time that satellite technology had been used to relay live pictures to a global audience for the first time. It was a game changer. And it came as a result between a collaboration between the Japanese government and NASA, who recommissioned a communication satellite that was originally designed for telephone use. And combined that with compression technology, a third of the world was able to watch a full marathon in real time. Tokyo also featured improved timing and scoring technologies, and it was the first time computers had been used to record statistics, enabling athletes' times to be shown on things like television screens. Seiko, a household name now, but it made its debut as the official timekeeper at the Olympics, linking the starting gun with a quartz clock and a photo finish camera, making it possible to record results down to 1/100th of a second. Never been possible before. Now, what's interesting out of that, I think Japan clearly articulated their technology leadership, but Seiko, as a name that became global, it only took them 5 years after the Games for them to produce the first quartz technology wristwatch in 1968, and also then to bring the world's first commercial LCD digital watch, some of you might have owned one, into the market in 1973. And their business has grown since then. When I then look at Montreal, the first turf made by AstroTurf in the USA was used making nylon fibers. And fun enough, it was employed during the hockey games. Now, it rained a lot during the Montreal Olympics, and the turf played much better, hence why hockey's wet turfs were accidentally born. So we had innovation and then improvements on the innovation through accidents. And nylon's proven to be an outstanding surface that's now been adopted in many other games. You probably can't imagine a world without it. When I then go on to Los Angeles in 1984, that's really the first time where technology has met sport. This was widespread use of computers, electronic messaging, real-time email and correspondence, and one of the largest communications networks ever developed. Personal computers help record results. swimming times, track races, mass spectrometers and gas chromatographers tested athletes for banned substances. State-of-the-art pages reminded athletes and competitors where they needed to be in event starting times. And all of a sudden, it was where the athletic games and the Brisbane Olympic Games and the LA Games, you can start to see the opportunity for how Brisbane can take technology to another level that was started by Tokyo and then taken on board by Los Angeles. One of the more startling examples of how technology has helped a nation build was probably in Korea in 1988. The Olympic Games in Seoul accelerated the growth of technical expertise in Korea. And as a result, the country has been considered one of the world's electronics leaders. In 2019, Korea was ranked as the most innovative country in the world, according to the Bloomberg Innovation Index, and it's held the title for a sixth consecutive year. The Olympic Games in 1988 encouraged the use of lots of locally sourced electronic equipment, which in turn boosted the national electronics industry sales. And that in turn led to other industries being born, such as the automotive industry. And look where markets like Hyundai and Kia now conquer the world in the automotive market. Jump forward to Barcelona in 1992, playing around with advanced materials. In 1992, UK cyclist Chris Boardman won gold in the individual pursuit on a revolutionary bicycle with a monocoque frame, an ultra-lightweight carbon fiber material usually reserved for Formula One cars. Boardman's gold medal was the first in 72 years for Team GB cycling team. And now it's just commonplace to see carbon fiber materials being used everywhere. What opportunities could there be for Brisbane, for Australian companies? And then jumping forward to Atlanta in 1996, this was when the World Wide Web was just starting to reach households. Seems amazing that we had a world before the internet. But Atlanta was the first games website and introduced fan mail. And today, Atlanta now ranks 8th among all US Canadian cities for tech talent and number 1 in the Southeast. They even have a bookstore dedicated to engineers, which I find amazing. I'd love to go and visit it. But it just shows that a vision for an Olympics and harnessing local talent, what that can do to create a sustainable and long-term outcome for the city and the country that hosts those nations. And jump forward to Sydney 2000, and many of us may remember it as opening and closing ceremonies. I see Sydney as an opportunity that really positioned Australia as a leader culturally. This was about a national identity when it came to innovation. It was a striking opportunity that presented Australia as a sophisticated, multicultural, lifestyle-loving nation. But did you also know that the Athletes' Village in Homebush was the largest solar-powered suburb in the world at that point in time? So we did use it to showcase what we could do, but it's questionable about whether we created a sustainable global leading advantage thereafter. And when you jump forward to 2008, and I've jumped a couple of Olympics just in the essence of time, but I couldn't help, having traveled a lot in China between 2005, 2007, and set up businesses there, I could see the wave that China was bringing to the world. But 2008, I think for everybody, changed the paradigm of what we thought China was about. No longer a low-cost developing nation, but a sophisticated, organized, and advanced country able to create world-leading facilities and events. And another example, Speedo's LZR Racer swimsuit took swimmers to unprecedented wins. And there was lots of talk about the suit being so successful that it led to accusations of technological doping. But you can see every Olympic Games has created opportunities for a nation, for companies, and for technologies to be showcased. Now, I remember the London Games, and London was probably the first one where sustainable and green venues really came on the landscape in terms of promoting what a country wanted to stand for. But it was also about robotics and 3D cameras and apps for the first time. It was probably one of the first sights of Boris Johnson, and most people remember James Bond and the Queen jumping out of planes. But it did serve to put a stamp on the world as to what London really stood for and wanted to invest in going forwards. And then when you think of Rio, wearables technology, virtual reality, and AR started to become commonplace. And jump forward to Tokyo in 2020 or 2021. Who can forget Intel's drone light show at the Olympics? And all of a sudden, you're now seeing fireworks that probably aren't that sustainably or environmentally friendly now being replaced around the world at this most recent year with electronic drone shows. So whoever got involved with drone technology for those shows at the Olympics is now in a global growth opportunity. We saw autonomous electric vehicles in the Games Village, robotic basketball players, in fact, robots everywhere, 3D cardboard beds for athletes as a drive for sustainability. And in fact, emission-free hydrogen gas used for the flames for the Olympic Stadium, personal thermal management, cooling and heating and clothing, just to name a few. And when you jump forward then to look at Paris in 2024 and Los Angeles again in 2028, the themes are very much about sustainability, reuse, innovative mobility. Will we see flying taxis or flying cars in LA? Well, maybe that's an opportunity for Brisbane. But the question for me is, what is it that Brisbane's opportunities showcase, and where are the opportunities for engineers and manufacturers? Maybe by that point in time, it might well be that we as individuals can all join the Olympics Games, put on a virtual reality headset, and join the 100-meter sprinters down the straight. So it might be that the Brisbane opportunity is much more digitally immersive. And what opportunities does that create? Another wacky idea. We're already using augmented reality and holograms in the manufacturing and design space in the automotive industry. Perhaps actually we won't be attending the games. Perhaps we'll be hologramming the games into our lounges and living rooms and pubs by that point in time. Who knows? But the opportunities are certainly going to be there in a very fast moving world. So I'd just like to leave you with some final considerations of things I would be thinking about. And I've not been to an Olympic Games as a manufacturer. But if I was in your shoes and the shoes of the industry, what would I be thinking about in terms of the opportunities? Well, for me, it's very much about understanding what is the vision that you'd like to see for the Olympic Games. What's your vision as a business? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And how do you get involved? And when is the right time to get involved? You know, is it through as an individual, as a business, as an association, through a cluster, through a government procurement process? I think I'd be remembering that this is about a 10 plus 10-year opportunity, and the government's made that very clear. But the pace of change is exponential. So just because the technology looks right now may well mean in 10 years' time that it's completely changed. Let's not forget that only 12 or 13 years ago, we didn't all have iPhones in our hand. It's come very quickly. And what are the minimum entry conditions? Is it a non-negotiable that everything must be reused, that everything must be CO2 neutral or even CO2 negative? What are the conditions that are going to be that have to play? I mentioned earlier that I think the opportunities for the Olympics are broad, but let's not forget that this is the Olympics and Paralympics, and our products and solutions that could be manufactured and designed may well be different for different solutions. Who's going to be your customer? Often we'll look for government to put out tenders, but it may not be clear until the strategy is clear who your customer is if you're an SME wanting to participate. And how are you going to forecast what consumers are going to want in 2020, 2032? Because if you're gearing up for design and manufacturing, who's going to buy it, even if it is showcased at the Olympics themselves? Where are you going to get the skills, talent, and experience from? And my hope is that much of that will be homegrown in Australia and not relying entirely on imported and migrant resources. But when you look at that, manufacturing is much broader than production. I think there's a huge opportunity to bring new talents and skills to really drive our industry forwards. And I think that creates an opportunity to look genuinely at innovation and not just evolution in the industry. The question to be asked is, are you pursuing products or processes or services or even platform technologies to take to the games and even to the market? And I'd be encouraging you to think about not so much about a minimal viable product, but how you can scale it. So what is your minimal scalable product or process or solution that you'd like to develop between now and 2032 and beyond? And then finally, I guess I'm very passionate to see that our approach is design and engineering led and not seen as a one-off. And therefore, it's got to be about export and global focus. What are the products and solutions that we want to use the Olympics to put Australia on the map and take the world? And who can be a catalyst for you in that process? Who are your partners? What can a university do to you? What can a government do? What can hubs like the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Hub in Brisbane do for you? And my final note of caution is you've just got to be careful. This is not just about short-term gains. Think of all those companies who pivoted, if I dare use that word, to make hand sanitizer or tried to make masks in the early stages of COVID. Did they really have a sustainable solution, or was it a quick grab to try and help but seize a business opportunity? This is about a long-term game, about leaving a legacy for your businesses, your skills and experience, and for the sector and for Australia at large. Thank you very much again for the opportunity, Amanda, to speak to you today. Really looking forward to hear what Shay has to say, and looking forward as well to hearing lots of interesting questions and join the debate later on. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your insights. I'd now like to welcome our second speaker, Shay Chalmers. Shay is one of Australia's most renowned manufacturing industry experts, engineering consultants, and keynote speaker. With cross-sector and global experience, Shay is a leader, mentor, and change maker at the forefront of innovative manufacturing solutions for Australian organisations. Shay's global career has spanned a wide range of manufacturing environments, from steel to medical devices, and several roles from the shop floor to executive management covering private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. Shay has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in engineering management, graduating with distinction. Shay currently works with organisations to remove roadblocks in the commercialisation process to bring Australian innovation to life. By breaking down barriers to change, Shay helps to enable the establishment and reshoring of manufacturing in Australia. Please welcome Shay Chalmers.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Amanda said, my name is Shay Chalmers, and I'm a leader in the manufacturing and engineering industry. I work with people from industry, government, and education to harness ideas and create opportunities for Australia's manufacturing industry. Firstly, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are gathered on today, and to acknowledge Australia's first engineers and manufacturers, and pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. When we think about the Olympics, the sports events are usually what comes to mind. But there is so much more when organising, managing, and executing an event of this size. Given the significant runway we have leading into Brisbane 2032, I think it's important that we take a step back and critically assess the potential flow-on impacts that we can leverage from the Games as a catalyst for our manufacturing industry. There's not a lot of info in the public domain just yet, but essentially, if you distill all the submissions and publications down to their essence, the vision is to create a lasting social, economic, and environmental legacy to accelerate our long-term priorities. This goal will be delivered in partnerships across all levels of government, industry, and the community. But what does this mean for Australian manufacturing? To find this answer, we really need to dig a little deeper, as connecting this high-level legacy vision of social, economic, and environmental impact to Australian manufacturing is not so straightforward. In starting to connect the dots between the Olympics and manufacturing, I thought it might be worthwhile to begin to break down the elements that our manufacturing industries could contribute to. Just taking a very high-level view, and I'm sure there are some elements that I've missed. But if we look at the Olympics and the supply chains required to service the needs, there are a few key themes that pop up. Infrastructure, transportation, energy generation, product design and supply, and systems and software. Infrastructure could mean green steel produced using renewable energy, new carbon neutral forms of cement, wood structures and frames grown and manufactured in a sustainable way, potentially using novel composites to add to them. Transportation could be driverless vehicles powered by renewable energy, stored in Australian-made batteries made from minerals that can be endlessly remanufactured at the end of product life. If Boeing has selected Australia as the manufacturing location of choice for its loyal wingman unmanned aircraft, then unmanned passenger vehicles really isn't that much of a jump. Transportation could also be various forms of electric and hydrogen-powered mass transportation methods, which have been designed using Australian-made control systems and 3D printed circuit boards. Product design and supply. Well, the sky really is the limit on this one. There are literally thousands of products required to supply the Olympics. Where we can begin to make our mark on showing how Australia can lead the way in products designed with sustainability at the forefront of every element of the product's life cycle. Systems and software. Now, this is a fun area. It might sit in the background and not often seen, but our expertise in this space could certainly be leveraged for the Olympics. Whether it be sensors and IoT devices to monitor and measure driverless vehicles using AI and quantum technology, to measuring the people and their movements to adapt food and service supply based on real-time data and analysis, or the measurement software and hardware for the tracks. We already have world-class design and manufacture companies for integrated vehicle intelligence systems. Again, not a big jump for us to make. The interesting thing about this is that manufacturing is a foundation capability that cuts across all of these elements. Additionally, it's important to note that any innovative products designed for these purposes have the opportunity to supply across a variety of sectors and markets. The world is turning to carbon neutral products. This is our opportunity to set the pace and become a world leader in this space. Diversification of customer markets and sectors helps us to decouple the risk from designing and manufacturing products for a single event like the Olympics. Behind each of these elements is a plethora of potential opportunities that I've only just started to touch on. But let's just take a moment to dive deeper into one of these: energy. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you more of an indication of the breadth of potential opportunities that impact our manufacturing sectors. This is also a really good example of an area that has state and federal focus. And it's an area where Australia can really put itself on the map for future energy technology. There is direct mention of this in the submissions to the International Olympics Committee, where it is stated that initiatives related to Queensland's 50% renewable energy by 2030 and zero net emissions by 2050 targets were considered supporting initiatives to the Olympics. We as a nation have the opportunity to not just sell our molecules from our plentiful sunshine and our minerals that we dig out of the ground to export, but to design, manufacture, and export value-added, innovative, future energy technology to the world. There are a phenomenal amount of future energy projects in various stages around the nation, yet there are very few components in the future energy value chain that are actually made here in Australia. This is a significant opportunity for our nation to be on the front foot, designing and manufacturing solutions to meet the needs of our upcoming solar, wind, and hydrogen projects. And the Olympics can be used as the place to showcase this, showcase our Australian-made brand, showcase our capability in future energy innovation. It seems like some good synergy to me. From the stadiums to the uniforms, to the control system for monitoring athlete performance, to the food and beverages we serve, to the way we transport and store energy. Underneath all elements required for the Olympics is a wealth of opportunities for Australian manufacturing. But these can't be unlocked until we define what our vision is with more granularity. So what is our vision for Australian manufacturing for the Olympics? In order to answer this question, we need to first answer a number of other questions so we can begin to define the strategic priorities. Where are we world leading? Where do we want to be world leading? Can we use this opportunity as a platform to leverage and promote our innovative technologies? Do we want to showcase Australian design, engineering, and advanced manufacturing to the world? Is this our time to leverage our capabilities and uniqueness? Do we want to use this as a catalyst for future innovative manufacturing growth? Can we use this as an opportunity to challenge perceptions that exist towards Australian manufacturing? Determining this strategy is only the beginning of this journey. From here, we need to dive deeper to begin to define the design requirements for products and services that will support the greater Olympics value chain. What are the design and manufacturing considerations? Must the entire value chain be carbon neutral? Do we want to approach this using circular economy principles across the entire life of all products? Do all of the products need to be sustainably designed using green manufacturing processes? Do we want to be showcasing our green energy technology and innovation capability through the Olympics? What shouldn't we manufacture here? We are a small nation. Focus is important. Just as critical as asking what should we manufacture here is answering the question of what we shouldn't. These are all questions we'll need to answer in order to move to the next stage and enable industry to start looking at potential solutions. And this is where government comes into the picture. I believe there are a number of ways that government can support us in this journey, so we can make use of the time that we have leading into 2032. One of the key elements to support us is to define a vision for manufacturing for the Olympics. Build the narrative, tell us the story. Technology moves so fast, we need a vision to move towards. If government sets the target, industry and research will determine how to best achieve it. Building a foundation for collaboration, set up the structure and the mechanisms. It's difficult for industry alone to collaborate. Government can play such a critical role in this and facilitate collaboration between industry, research, and industry bodies, helping develop an action plan for how to create these collaborative environments so we can breed innovation. Build the vision, plan the strategies with industry and research institution. Collaboration is key. Identify the areas of opportunity for industry and the scale of opportunity. If we know how big the opportunity is, then we can start to design the solutions required. Design and deliver innovation in procurement processes. So why is innovation in procurement so important? Simply put, designing a manufacturable product to meet a customer's needs doesn't happen overnight. It takes years. If we don't understand the customer's needs, then we can't begin the process to design an appropriate product. This information will be well and truly understood by all the product designers out there today, but I do find that a lack of knowledge in the complexity of bringing a novel product to market is one of the challenges we face in the manufacturing industry. There is a tendency to wait until the 11th hour to communicate the tender requirements for procuring the product, which is often too late for local industry to engage. We can't just whip up a successfully designed and manufactured product overnight. This timeline has been designed by my colleagues at Untogo, and although it's specific to medical device development, and the timings and costs vary widely between industries, the core concepts of this hold true for all industries. We start with an idea, we build a prototype, perform a feasibility and market analysis, go through a series of iterative design phases, test that it works, and then transfer to manufacture. This is a multi-year activity, even for a simple product. All through this process, our good designers will be asking themselves, am I still meeting the needs of the customer? And can this be manufactured at scale at the appropriate cost? The purpose of this slide is to demonstrate that in order for us to develop and manufacture innovative products, we need time. We have a long runway into the Olympics, and we will need every minute of it if we want to take full advantage of this opportunity to showcase how innovative Australian manufacturers can be. Equally so, early visibility to tender requirements, combined with long-term order security, provides a game-changing catalyst for manufacturing, particularly in the case of opportunities like the Olympics. The challenge with this is that it turns the procurement process on its head. In order to achieve this change, collaboration with industry and research is required to define the design requirements for the products, understand what certifications are required, and how to break down the work packages into meaningful chunks for manufacturers. We need to know the expected volumes and expected cost and the timeframes for delivery. We need to understand what the requirements are for environmental, social, and governance in order to engage in this value chain. What this means is front-end loading the procurement process so that all parties get the best outcomes. But this requires innovation, collaboration, and a willingness to rethink our existing systems and processes. We need to approach this with curiosity and think what could be possible in procurement, rather than just doing things the way that we have done them in the past. If you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done. We need to rethink how we approach this. Looking forward, there are a few hints that can guide our direction in the IOC Future Host Commission response that's publicly available. One of the critical pillars of the Games is the environmental benefits and targets. Under this pillar, we aim to promote the evolution of environmental policy and establish best practice exemplars. The items on the screen outline a few of the initiatives which are mentioned in this document, which give us a bit of guidance as to where we are heading. We know the Games will be climate positive and that they will be keen to support initiatives that contribute to the renewable energy targets for Queensland. We know they are looking for sustainable mass transport systems to reduce emissions. We know they want to reduce waste and engage in circular economy practices to some degree. We know they want sustainable venues and services. What this means exactly is still not clear, though. We know they want enhanced technology and digital capabilities. It's not clear in what areas of the Games this will be relevant. However, there was some mention in the document of broadcast technology evolution, including augmented and virtual reality, cloud services, 5G, AI, and data analytics to allow premium broadcast accessible everywhere. So that does give us some hints into the tech required in order to enable that. So as industry, the best we can do at this stage is to ask ourselves, how can my products and services contribute to these initiatives? In order to truly make connections between the legacy vision and its impact on manufacturing, though, we really do need more information. A few handy hints that might be useful is to review all publicly available information. In particular, the Olympic Games Guide on Sustainable Sourcing is well worth a look. In an Olympic and Paralympic Games context, staging the event involves a significant provision of labour and consumption of resources in terms of materials and equipment for building, fitting out and dressing venues, use of sports equipment, event production, food and bev, energy, water, clothing, paper, merchandise, tech services, logistics, and accommodation. Outlined in the guide, it says the purpose is to help organising committees for the Olympic Games understand and meet the IOC's sustainable sourcing requirements and expectations. So there's a lot of information in there around sustainable sourcing. They published this 116-page document in 2019, and it's not directly related to manufacturing, and you need to make some connections there in order to get some insights, but there are some interesting insights on the process contained in there. I'd also recommend registering your interest with both the Queensland Government and the Industry Capability Network if you're interested in supplying products and services to the Olympics. The links are contained in the presentation. Additionally, if you're looking to connect with research institutions in Queensland with a particular focus area, I highly recommend checking out the Strategic Visualization tool. There's a number of tools with a number of different industries, from advanced manufacturing to biotech to renewable energy. And it really is a great tool to find out who's who in the zoo for research in Queensland. Last but not least, get involved. The more we can do to help guide the direction and provide feedback to the organisers, the better outcomes we will have for all. If you have a chance to attend events on the topics or roadshows on the opportunity, put your hand up, give your feedback, and learn about the processes as we get more information. It really is early days yet, but more information is sure to come in the near future. The Olympics is full of opportunities for us to showcase how innovative our Australian manufacturing community really are. It is an opportunity for us to focus on key strategic areas around sustainability and push technology development forward in this nation. What is our biggest risk? Not using our time wisely. The time is now to leverage this opportunity to its full potential. We need a game plan. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. And we need to start somewhere. Let's all work together to create a lasting social, economic, and environmental legacy for Australian manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you. A huge thank you to our speakers. It's now your turn to get involved. If you'd like to ask a question to David and or Shay, could you please type it in the YouTube chat box? If you could provide your name and who the question is for, that would help. Thank you also to everyone who put forward questions when they registered for today's event, so we might begin with some of those. We have a question directed to both David, starting with David and then Shay, from John. Good afternoon, John. John's based in Queensland. John is asking us, with the current global logistic and supply issues we're all experiencing at the moment, how do we use this Olympics in 2032 as an opportunity to increase the local manufacturing capability that is sustainable post-2032, but also harness the drive for carbon neutral reductions with the supply and manufacturing sector? David. Shay, sorry about that. Shay, do you have a view on that?
That's okay. Sure, I can jump in. I think it's a really good opportunity. We are having current supply chain issues, but it's really important that we're strategic in picking what are our priority areas that we actually want to supply from a manufacturing perspective. As I said before, we are a small nation and we can't be everything to everyone. So looking at what are some of those supply opportunities that we could leverage both the Olympics, but also the greater opportunities as well. I think it's important that we look not just to the Olympics as a single event, but use it as a springboard to communicate our value proposition to the world, if you will. The products and services that we design for the Olympics should not be just targeted at that one event. They need to have a solid business case like any new product does, and make sure that there are sectors and markets that can be served outside of that single event. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Shay. And David, are you back on the airways?
I'm just going to check if you can hear me.
I can hear you perfectly, so I assume our audience can too.
Yeah, I look at.
So do you want to follow on for Shay's comments, or should we move on?
Look, happy to move on. The only comment I'd make is this is not, while this topic is about 2032, the imperative for building local capability and taking, dare I say, advantage of this disruption in global supply chains is exactly what every other industrialized nation is doing and what Australia also needs to do. So my message is be smart and selective on local content and local building of supply chains here, but also keep one eye on global exports. But those opportunities will lead to 2032. It's not about waiting until then to work out what we need to do more of in Australia.
Thanks, David. And David, in your presentation, you talked a bit about new technologies and how they'd emerged from the various games over the years. Following on from that, we've had a great question from George, who's in the US, asking, what are the new technologies that will be used in Brisbane?
That's a really hard one to forecast. I look back and I made a comment that iPhones didn't exist 12 or 13 years ago, and yet you could not imagine a world without apps and accessibility 24 hours a day. So what new technologies will exist? Well, I floated a couple up, particularly around augmented and virtual reality, bringing the world and collaboration into people's homes and potentially allowing people to participate in the games. I think there will naturally be more use of robotics, more use of sensors, but I wonder whether that rapid digitalization and the ability for us as TV watchers to actually participate in the games and bring the games into our homerooms or into our pubs and venues, that might well be the opportunity for Brisbane 2032. And that's a huge technology opportunity. It could be a real game changer. And I don't see that yet on the radar for the next two Olympic Games. So potentially Brisbane's the one where that augmented and virtual and collaborative world really comes together.
Thanks, David. Thanks. At our first webinar on engineering the Olympics, we talked a little bit about this from the state government input. But we have got a question directed first to you, Shane, then David, if you could hop in. And it's from Anchor in the Middle East, who's asking, will the Olympics have positive impact on other Australian regions, or will it affect Brisbane only? If we can kick off with you, Shay. Thank you.
I think it's a great question because it's not just about where the Olympics are held. And if we're just looking at the location in which it's held, then we're really constraining ourselves. The opportunities for us are truly in looking at the entire value chain. How do we leverage capabilities and expertise across the nation to build innovative products? And so I suspect if we play our cards right, that it will have significant impacts across Australia and also across the broader global supply chains as well. It's a really huge opportunity for us to design products with sustainability in mind, really truly embrace circular economy in what we're doing. And it's just something that we are not succeeding in now. There are pockets of opportunity, or there's pockets of examples of companies that are doing this, but we're not holistically approaching this by any means. So I would love to see the Olympics used, as an opportunity for us to catapult forward with sustainable design and manufacture, thinking about how we can reuse the product at the end of life, designing it with reusability in mind. It's not just about recycling, but how can it be reapplied to a different purpose, or how can we ensure that even just a product has a use after the Olympics. Single-use products should not have a place in 2032, but we need to design the solutions to make sure that that actually occurs.
David,
thanks, Shay. Great. Yeah, I think key to it lies in collaboration, and that comes down to collaboration even between, and this is not to get political, but even between state governments. Every state and territory around Australia has some level of uniqueness in terms of which industrial sectors, which priority sectors, they have some real strengths. And that's based on skill, access to raw materials, and it's an opportunity for us to bring a One Australia to the table. So really the message has got to be about collaboration, not necessarily the perception that it's all about Queensland versus New South Wales or Victoria, because that rubs off onto how companies behave, and it rubs off onto how universities behave and associations. So if we're really going to take a vision of what Australia can offer the world and showcase that in Brisbane, it must be a national approach. And the more people can collaborate, even within competition, I think that's going to be a key element of success.
Thanks, David. I just want to move on a little bit now to the role of engineers. And we've had a great question. Good afternoon to Helen, who's in Queensland, asking us, what role do engineers have in entering the Olympics, of ensuring the Olympics are authentically sustainable? Shay, can we start with you and then move on to David?
Sure. Well, you're asking a panel of engineers, so I say engineers have everything to do with it. But I think it's really, particularly when we're looking at circularity and how we design products, looking outwards to our expertise and seeing what other experts there are out there to help us to design the products in a better way. It's been funny. I've seen in other projects that I've worked on, we've achieved real success when we've got a diversity of skills and backgrounds that are involved in any project. And I think sometimes we get into the habit of just, I'm a mechanical engineer by surrounding myself with other mechanical engineers who think in a like-minded way. But when we're trying to do something different, we actually need to design the system differently. So getting people involved who understand circularity, who understand sustainability of materials, looking at novel material design, looking at reuse, looking at renewable energy, I think is really about having engineers and experts from a broad variety of sectors to bring that diversity of thought, and that's going to be key. The role that engineers play, I mean, I think I touched on it a fair bit in the presentation, but every aspect of designing for the Olympics will require engineers to be involved. But it'll also require a plethora of other experts to support us, particularly when we're going for a carbon positive games.
Thanks, Shay. David.
Yeah, from one engineer to another. Okay, and engineers are incredibly good at providing the structure, the discipline, the rigor to projects and activities. And to me, to Shay's great comment about diversity, I've seen engineers where you bring the creativity. Engineers are the ones that provide the structure and process to deliver new creative solutions. My second comment on that is I included a slide in my presentation about how I like to define manufacturing, that it's more than just the production. And there's not one stage of that process from research and development through to how do you manage products or processes at the end of their life, well beyond the production, that engineering doesn't have a role to play at every single part of that journey to make sure standards are met or achieved, that testing is done properly, that ethics are applied, and that new ideas can be brought to market in a very rigorous and process-driven way, including in meeting things like business case targets and cost models, and then looking at ways to continuously improve. That's the engineer's domain. So I see it's across the board. The question is, what are the types of engineers we're going to need going forward? Because they will be different from what I studied when I was doing my degree in manufacturing engineering, where it was about, will the truck cause the bridge to fall over? We're now in a very digital world. And I also think the other skill needed are those soft skills such as collaboration, communication, problem solving, and bringing that together with the rigor and applicability that engineers can apply to designs and standards.
Thanks, David. We've had quite a few questions around leadership. So I want to start with this one that came in from Theo. And Theo is based in WA. And he's directed it to you, David, and also to you, Shay, asking, what can leaders do to compete with more affordable overseas manufacturing labour? David.
Yeah, to me, it comes down to, I think, something I talked about earlier. Yes, it's about applying technology, but you can very easily get sucked into a technology vortex. And to me, it's about how you use technology to create something that is unique or new, and develop a strategy and a vision that really inspires your business and your employees, inspires customers and consumers. So to me, the answer lies in technology, but it's not about technology, it's how you apply it and the business model you create. I keep coming back to this concept of uniqueness and scalability. And we challenge in Australia because it's so easy to buy products from overseas, or at least before COVID, it was very easy to buy products in from overseas. Now supply chains are disrupted. And across many industries, such as building, construction, defense, space, food, and agri, businesses across Australia are finding local solutions because they need to keep business continuity going. And that's, I think, an opportunity that will significantly grow manufacturing in Australia. But I think the hub of it is just to make sure that you're always stepping back and working out what is unique about your business model, not just today, but how can you use digital tools and digital connectiveness to maintain that uniqueness going forward? Otherwise, you're likely to be competing simply on cost. And when supply chains do get back together, the reality is we will be competing against with some of the lower cost countries. So it's about smart business models, application of technology, but finding the uniqueness to make sure that you're competing more on value and not necessarily simply on your production cost. And design and engineering are absolutely key to that recipe.
Shay, do you want to add to that?
Summarised very well, Dave. I think the other thing that we can do is get out of our own way. Dave and I have the luxury of traveling around the country and around the world when borders are open and looking at manufacturers doing amazing things. But what often strikes me as interesting is here in Australia, we seem to not like to get up and tell the wonderful stories that we're doing. We are innovative. We do create truly unique products. We have a fabulous global brand around quality and the value proposition that we bring in designing to meet the customer's needs. We've got so much going for us. And I think often where we go wrong as leaders is we don't get up and we don't tell the story. We don't share our successes. We don't talk about what we're doing. There's so many times that I visited a manufacturer that nobody's ever heard of who's doing amazing things, and when I talk about it at barbecues, because I'm just that interesting and talk about manufacturing all the time, people are often so surprised at what we actually do here. So I think if we get out of our own way and embrace our inherent innovative nature that we have here in Australia, then we can achieve some successes there too.
Thanks, Shay.
And Shay, Amanda, I might just add to that. You're touching on
sure.
behavioural attributes that leaders show, and behavioural attributes are things like collaboration. I give examples to companies to say they're looking at industry 4 solutions, and they will say, and I say, why don't you partner up with some of the other companies who live near you in your local clusters? And the response is, well, we all compete. And I'll say, well, do you really understand where your uniqueness is? And I'll give an example. If you all invested in a warehouse management system, one of you could look at barcoding, one of you could look at robotics, one of you could look at digital twins and simulation models, and maybe you share the investment. Which one of you competes because you have a really robust warehouse management system? And will all of you benefit from lower working capital costs, better practices, happier and safer employees? And the answer is often, yeah, that's great. I say, well, okay, go ahead and collaborate. And it still doesn't happen. and so I just find that there are behavioral attributes. So what can leaders do? I think open their eyes up to collaborating, because the reality is competition is often not within Australia, it's from overseas. And if we can get that mindset change, I think there's amazing things companies can do together to share the risk of investment to improve the cost competitiveness of their business.
So, David, just putting what you both said together and sticking with leadership, does that answer David in WA's question? Is it viable for Australia to become a manufacturing leader within 10 years?
The simple answer is yes, but selectively. We're not going to be able to manufacture everything here in Australia. Just go to things like semiconductor and memory chips. The investment for those kind of technologies is in the billions of dollars to scale up. But there may be other areas in electronics where we can position ourselves that those electronics very much drive or enable us for the key priority sectors that we're very good at and we have other raw materials for in Australia, such as critical minerals or food and beverage. So to me, we can be world leaders in design and manufacturing, and I'm keeping using that connection, but we need to be much more selective, I think, in what are those high technology, probably highly regulated industries where very smart ideas and smart manufacturing processes will enable us to compete, but importantly, compete and export to the world, not just for supply here in Australia. But reality is we're not going to make everything in Australia. We just don't have the scale of the community, and the challenges exist within manufacturing. That's just not practical. Probably for most countries our size, that would be a restriction in now and in 10 years.
And of course, none of this is going to happen without the necessary skills. And we've had quite a few questions coming at this from different angles. So I'll start with Jules. Jules is in Queensland. Starting with you, Shay. What skills are going to be required to take advantage of the Olympics? And probably the manufacturing vision more broadly.
That's $1 million question. And the skills challenge is one that we have been struggling with in manufacturing for a very long time. There's a number of reasons for that, from managing perceptions within manufacturing to also a lack of understanding about the future and the success of manufacturing that we're having, but also technical skills. We're now competing not only with engineering foundation engineering industries, I'll call it. But now the technical skills required for our engineers, scientists, and designers are actually applicable across all industries. So the demand for these skills is quite great. So that means that we're in more of a competitive space around the skills required. So for manufacturing in general, there's been a fair bit of mapping required about what the skills are that we'll need, but it's essentially a mixture of both tertiary qualified and vocational qualified workers. But it's always about interacting with technology in a positive way. The skills required for the Olympics, it's pretty similar to the skills that we need in manufacturing in general. But we are going to be competing on a world stage to try and attract and develop these skill sets, and it will be a challenge. It already is a challenge in 2022 to actually get the right technical skills you need in a manufacturer. So I suspect that moving forward, that will actually become more of a challenge. So that's something that we need to keep considerations for, particularly with our research institutions and also our vocational educators, that we need to get the pipeline up. We need to be attracting students from a very young age into these industries because the demand is going to be so great. With or without the Olympics, the demand is going to be so great for skills required for manufacturing.
And do you think that will put new expectations for the higher education sector? We've got quite a few of them watching today. Shay, starting with you.
I think the core foundation of education is strong. We have a great reputation, particularly in engineering education here. Our qualifications are recognised on a global scale. But the challenge lies within the fact that technology is actually moving so fast. And so there's a lot of ongoing education that all people, including engineers, need to have. So I think as we move forward, the role of micro-credentialing or lifelong learning or continuous education is going to become more and more important. Those foundation skills don't change, but how we apply them in a digital sense, or what that impact that has on human capital, or what impact that has on the environment, and how we design with circular principles in mind, for instance. I wasn't taught any of those things when I did my foundation degree. So it's really about learning and continuing to learn and go as you go through your career. And our institutions are going to have to move with that and really create short courses and micro-credentials and things that we can access that at the time in which we need it.
Thanks, Shay.
Amanda, I might just add, I have a complementary but slightly different approach that I've built up over many years of visiting hundreds, if not thousands, of companies here and in other countries. And also being an engineer, I look at supply chains, so pull-push systems, and I always ask, where is the demand coming from? In Australia, we have the best part of 50,000 SMEs in manufacturing based on ABS data. Of those 50,000 who employ people, more than 90% roughly employ less than 20 people. And so my priority area when I think of skills that we need going forward is actually the leaders and owners and management within those small and medium businesses. Because if you're going to lift the capability, it's about the digital literacy, the technical literacy, and we can't train everyone to be an engineer, but understanding how digital technologies and how the youth of the workforce will be thinking as they come out now, because my kids think very differently about collaboration and digital interaction. So if I was investing in skills for the medium to long term, I would be focusing very significantly on encouraging the business owners and family-owned businesses at the SME level to lift their leadership capability and learn a bit more about innovation and transformation and business models and strategies, and even things like continuous improvement, which is still not a common practice across most of our industry. And in my experience of seeing companies that are going places versus those that don't go places, it comes down to the single uniqueness is the quality of the leadership. And if you get that right, that will pull the talent. It will drive the skills need. It will drive the training and development, and it will drive the businesses forward. So I always look to create a solution at the business leader level, as well as the supply chain through the tertiary organizations and the TAFEs and the schools and the reskilling of engineers. If you don't have the demand, you won't generate the supply.
Thanks, David. Over to you, Shane. Thank you to everybody for all these questions. We'll get through as many as we can. David, you talked about this Olympics being very different as far as the infrastructure wouldn't be concentrated in one city. And we've had a question from Nick in South Australia asking you, Shay, what can be done to reduce consumption of materials for the Olympics? Shouldn't we be reusing Olympics infrastructure to minimise material use and reduce embodied carbon in construction? Shay.
Absolutely. These are fabulous comments. It was interesting as I was reading through a lot of the documentation that was submitted, there really was a strong focus on leveraging existing infrastructure. And because I think critically over the years, that's been something that people have been quite critical with the Olympics about putting all of this effort into building new infrastructure that's not actually in fact utilized post games. So I can't remember what the stat was exactly, but I thought it was about 80% of infrastructure is already existing for this Olympics. I might be a bit off on that, but I completely agree. There will, however, be products and infrastructure and also products that need to be created for the Olympics. And so I would like to see the strategies really focus on ensuring that we are designing these to be carbon positive, to be manufactured using green energy, using renewable raw materials that can be reused at the end of life, like really looking at the whole of life product life cycle and ensuring that it has an application after the Olympics and that it can be reused or repurposed or recycled in a way that doesn't create any additional environmental burden. So I think it's a really great statement. It's just early days and we don't know exactly how that's going to apply.
Thank you. David, do you want to comment on that?
I think, you hear these phrases, things like circular economy solutions and so on. I always look at these opportunities just for more local input at the end of the day. I also sense that consumers themselves are shifting quite rapidly, even in our personal lives, but also in businesses. There will be penalties. Let's just be very clear. There are going to be increasing penalties applied for things like landfill, for non-use of materials that can be reused or recycled or repurposed. But I think what we're going to find is consumers will be driving that wave perhaps before businesses are able to adapt to it. So I wouldn't be looking at designing anything today that didn't have an end of life and repurpose and reuse, nor didn't have a local input in terms of raw materials that could support Australia. And the reason I'd be doing it is because, one, I think it would be less expensive to manufacture, but more importantly, you're doing the right thing. But you're also not exposing yourself to the risk of global supply chains, which, as we know, are disrupting everything at the moment. And everything I can read is saying this disruption is going to exist for some time, as in not months, but potentially years, if it ever does settle down again. I think we're going to see other countries around the world already looking at local inputs. So to me, the whole circular economy argument is the opportunity it creates for more local manufacturing of smarter materials input that can lead to repurpose. But the consumers will be voting with their wallets in terms of what they buy, probably before businesses are ready.
Thank you, David. And if we stay with that theme of sustainable Australian manufacturing, we've had a question coming from Robert in Queensland. He said, if we do need to have an edge over other country, what is your view on investing in research and development specifically? Which is a great question.
Yeah, maybe I'll lead with that one. My background was in the automotive industry, and I worked with an Australian company called Futuristic here. Right back in 2003, we recognised that being an Australian company only and supplying the local car industry ultimately carried long-term risk, and therefore we had to build capacity to take products overseas. But a car seat is a car seat, a floor carpet is a floor carpet, and we needed to differentiate ourselves. So we invested very heavily in design, engineering, testing, and validation capability. And it was that capability that allowed us to go and set up factories in the USA and China. Futuris ultimately ended up designing and manufacturing all the seats for Tesla from Melbourne, all right, would you believe? So how was that possible? Well, we had to be cost competitive, but it was the uniqueness and capability how we design. So I always come back to it's about design and engineering and uniqueness that allows you to take smart products to the world. And we can invest in that in Australia. We've got industries that have done that really well. We just really need to focus on that design and engineering capability and really build that standard up, I think, as rapidly as we possibly can in Australia. And the manufacturing bit will, I think, largely take care of itself.
Shay.
We have a phenomenal research sector here in Australia that we don't leverage enough as industry. Collaboration, as we've touched on a few times, collaboration is really hard. It's hard to do, particularly in manufacturing when you are focused on getting product out the door to meet your customers' needs. You're always fighting fires. There's always something going wrong. So collaboration is inherently difficult. But I just feel that our educational system here and our research environment here has so much to offer. And there's so many conversations I have with various universities around the country, just talking to them about what they're working on. And I can see direct correlation between, that'd be such a great business opportunity for these particular businesses or this particular business, and making the connections in my own mind. But I just don't think we do enough collaborating with research. There's a number of reasons for it. Sometimes the mechanisms can be quite clunky. Sometimes it's difficult and we have misaligned priorities, but it's a significant opportunity that we are definitely not utilizing as much as we could. The collaboration between research, industry, and government is, I believe, going to be one of the things that creates success for us designing the vision for the Olympics. We've touched on it today. The vision isn't clear. We need to understand more, but once we understand where we're heading, getting universities together with industry, with government to all work together to achieve those things is really where the sweet spot is.
Okay. Thanks, Shay. We are running a bit out of time, so David, I might just try and put a couple of questions together here. We've had a question come in from Tom, who says, you mentioned advanced robotics and vertical farming. Are these products actually manufactured in Australia or designed, tested and sent overseas for commercial level manufacturing? And then just hold that thought. Also, a bit broader question is that from South Australia asking, what is the opportunity for digital engineering in the sector going forward? Thanks, David. Hope I haven't overloaded you there.
No, look, I'll answer the last one first. It's an interesting phrase, digital engineering, because I can't think of any classification of engineer that shouldn't be very digitally savvy and using a whole range of digital tools in whatever workplace or design or engineering they're doing. So to me, digital engineering, and I can't remember what the phrase for it, but it's a bit of a misnomer because it should just be integrated into all of engineering practices. That said, we have a generation like myself of engineers who were qualified, I don't know, dare I say 30 years ago, that actually need to retool and relearn. In terms of what are we doing in Australia, the examples I've shown in my presentation, such as Swarm Farm, are doing exactly. They are manufacturing here in Australia and looking at export opportunities. The reality is, however, we too often, to Shay's point, don't hear of those companies that are doing this here in Australia. Unfortunately, what makes the news is companies actually commercializing overseas. And we had one yesterday, I think, with Tritium setting up a large-scale facility in the USA. Now, there's probably a very good reason they're doing that is because the USA is more advanced in terms of their incentives and rollout of electric vehicles. The scale of the country is massive, and Biden has a plan for very heavily made in America, and he's putting hundreds of billions of dollars into clean energy infrastructure that's driving manufacturing. So if you're Tritium and you're offered support to set up a factory in America that absolutely fits for a scale that Australia just doesn't have realizable yet, you're going to jump at that as a business opportunity. But there are lots of other examples where we are doing that here in Australia and we are developing capability. Another example is Bosch Australia. Now, Bosch is a very proud, decades-old company from Germany. They've been in Australia manufacturing diodes for car alternators. Now, Bosch, as a result of the diversification strategy from automotive in Australia, realized that they had a capability in manufacturing their own plant and equipment and assembly and robotic cells. They've now got a business that is growing exponentially in designing and manufacturing automated process equipment that is Industry 4 standard and highly digital, and they're selling them to companies like Illume up in Queensland who are making rapid antigen tests. They're selling to a whole range of industries. So we have this capability and we can make it in Australia. We probably just don't hear enough of the stories. But there's no doubt the scale is greater overseas, and that's always going to be the attraction that we compete against. I think if we can stick to the priority sectors here in Australia, we will build that scale and we'll be able to export or come up with modular manufacturing whereby you can duplicate the manufacturing at an economic and competitive scale, both in Australia and overseas. And someone like Carbon Revolution for the world's first one-piece carbon fiber wheel, that may well end up being what they do, which is modular manufacturing at competitive scale in different parts of the world. But the design and development and the core manufacturing is still done here in Australia.
Thank you. Thanks, David. We have run out of time, and once again, thank you to everybody that's sent through questions. But a question that's come in from Matthew in Queensland, which I think sort of sums it up. And if I could just get both your view, and I'm sure on behalf of all the audience, the question is, in your view, what are the critical things that need to be in place to enable Australian manufacturing for the Olympics? Shay.
A plan, a target, a direction for us to head. And I think that's really simply put, if we know where we're heading, we will design the solutions. It's just not clear. It's not clear to us exactly the direction we need to head and what our targets are. I think once we sort that out, the solutions will figure out itself.
David, do you want to bring us home?
I'd agree. No, I'd agree entirely. I think most manufacturers in Australia would be what I call order takers and not yet order makers necessarily. And consequently, most of us would be looking to who is our customer? Who's going to tell me what they need, how much, by when, what it's going to cost, to what standard, what specification? And without some guide rails that manufacturers can look at, it's actually very difficult for anyone to say, how do I get involved? That said, I have shown examples of companies in bending ColourBond steel to CO2 reduced concrete to all sorts of other technologies who are not gearing up for the Olympics, but will be absolutely primed when they're commercializing to see that technology embedded in the Olympics. So my message is, if you're not innovating or collaborating in this space or thinking about uniqueness, if you're not doing that in the next 1 or 2 years, you're likely to be not in the pipeline or in consideration for those companies that might be considered for supporting governments and other procurement programs.
Thanks, David. So winding it up, and in the tradition of the Thought Leaders series, we've once again run out of time. Please join me again in thanking David Tudor and Shay Chalmers for their time and fabulous presentations and insights today. Engineering the Olympics is a series, and with the Winter Olympics currently underway, very topical, so please stay tuned for further sessions. I'd also again like to thank Engineers Australia industry partners, Arup, Oricon, Carno, GHD and SMEC for making today possible. As always, we're looking for your feedback to help us improve and plan future sessions. So if you could please complete a short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below. Thank you again for joining us for the first Thought Leaders event for 22, and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Good afternoon.